Thousands gather for pro-Hamas demonstration in Toronto, while pro-Israeli students rally held in U of T. This is the Great White North Report. I'm in love with the system. Never going home. I'm in love. So the Hamas-Israeli war has really affected Canada in certain ways, especially our bigger cities where we have high Muslim populations as well as Jewish populations. So 2 days ago, there was a massive demonstration in Toronto as well as in Mississauga for the pro-Hamas Arab movement, and the pro-Israeli students held a rally at the U of T. These demonstrations came because of a hospital in Gaza was hit by a rocket. And immediately, everyone thought the Israelis had hit this civilian hospital and killed a lot of people. And of course, our news media at the time didn't do their due diligence and immediately assessed it as an Israeli airstrike. Hamas is going to win the propaganda war because they're there on the ground. They control what the media can see, and a lot of times they control what the media can talk about within Gaza. And if the media did not toe the line in certain aspects, then they will be kicked out. So it's important to note that there is no such thing as freedom of the press in Gaza. You're going to see what they want you to see. Turns out that with a lot of the Israelis showed footage. The United States military believes it, so do many others, that it was a misfire by Islamic militants. Remember, there are other Islamic militant groups operating within Gaza. Hamas lets them in as long as they attack Israel. There are factions within Gaza, and they do not care how many civilians die, as long as it serves their purpose. So the demonstrations came in the wake of a massive blast that rocked a Gaza City hospital, packed with wounded and other Arabs seeking shelter Tuesday, killing hundreds of people. Hamas blamed an Israeli airstrike, while the Israeli military blamed a rocket misfired by other Arab militants. And it's true, though. A lot of the rockets that are fired off by these militants aren't exactly factory made. A lot of them are homemade, and there's going to be a lot of errors. It happens quite frequently. You fire 7,000 rockets at Israel, chances are probably 10% of them are going to misfire and land somewhere else. So a lot of them do land on Gaza itself, killing more of their own people. They don't care. They can blame it on the Israelis. And that's pretty much what they've done in this case. Not saying that the Israeli air bombardment hasn't been killing civilians, because it has. But you got to remember, they're trying to select military targets. And when Hamas hides behind, uses their own civilians as human shields, it's pretty disgusting. And we have these people who cannot see that, cannot wait until the air is cleared to see whatever happened, or see what the experts at least say, before making an opinion. Unfortunately, I find Islam to be a political Islam. Islam is not a religion. It's a political ideology. On par, fascism and socialism. Not saying that they're the same, but on par with that kind of ideology. And you can see here, they get all upset. Even though it was their own people firing upon their own people. Even though the Hamas started this conflict. Had Hamas not made that massive raid into Israel, killing a lot of people, innocent people, civilians, unarmed, just going about their day, having fun on the weekend. These weren't Israeli protesters going to the border and throwing rocks at police or causing disturbances. These were just civilians that were killed that weekend. And Israel responded, and that's what happens. My question is, Hamas has all these underground tunnels. Why aren't they sheltering their own citizens in the tunnels? Why didn't they make shelters for their citizens? Or at least some of them. So the federal government isn't saying who it thinks is behind the Gaza hospital blast. And they just say it's imperative that innocent Arabs be protected without assigning blame. Again, in the fog of war, a lot of things are going to happen, but I don't see a crater in the picture. The Ali Arab Hospital, an Anglican church-run facility in Gaza City. So again, Christians are helping Muslims. Where did all the Muslim help? During World War II, Britain, when they knew they were going to get bombed by Germany, they were sending their kids to the countryside. People sheltered in the underground subway tunnels. Hamas has built all these tunnels, this tunnel system in the Gaza Strip. Why aren't they protecting their citizens? Because they use them as human shields. Or why aren't they sending them to other countries? Like a lot of kids, Canada took quite a few kids from England, as well as from Holland in later stages of the war. Why aren't all these other Arab Muslim countries at least taking the kids in? Well, in Egypt's case, it's really, they've already had a huge fight with their own militants, the Muslim Brotherhood, and they don't want other militant groups operating on their soil. They think that if the Israelis push Hamas over the border, or they let civilians in, Hamas will blend in with them and establish militant cells within Egypt that will carry out strikes on Israel, just like in what happening in Lebanon, and the Israelis will respond in kind on Egyptian soil. Also, they think that Israel will outright annex the Gaza Strip after they pushed all the Arabs out of it. If anything, I would rather see Egypt take over the Gaza Strip and enforce its laws, root out the militants. Because you have to remember, from 1948 to 1950 to 1967, with a couple of lulls like in the Suez Crisis, Egypt controlled the Gaza Strip. Israel, in one of its peace offerings to Egypt, offered it back. The Egyptians refused the Gaza Strip. They didn't want it. I think now it's time for Egypt to take on that responsibility. Now, Jordan, the Jordanians, they've accepted many refugees, but not all of them. Again, this is another question of why. Because again, after the 1948 war, the Jordanians controlled the West Bank, right up until 1968, when they joined other Arab countries, foolishly, during the Six-Day War. They were lied to by the Egyptians and decided to go to war. They thought the Egyptians were winning, so they decided to go in. Boy, were they surprised. They got their asses kicked and sent scurrying to the east side of the Jordan River. They lost the West Bank. Now, I don't know why that from 1948 to 1967, why all the Arab refugee camps, all those refugees weren't settled on the West Bank. Why weren't they given lands as compensation in the West Bank and resettle? Then we wouldn't have this problem with Jewish settlers coming into the West Bank. And it would have been much easier to create a country there on the West Bank, because the Arabs didn't want it. It was part of their policy not to allow things like that to happen. And now people are paying the price for the mistakes the Arab leaders made back then. So MPs block conservative attempts to probe CBC coverage of Hamas attacks. CBC News language guide says use of the word terrorism can leave journalists taking sides in a conflict. Well, of course, it was a terrorist attack by Hamas. This wasn't a declaration of war, and Hamas knew that whatever territory they occupied, they weren't going to be able to keep. The Israeli military was going to come in and take it all back. This was just a raid to sow destruction and terror and let the world know that they're still around. Hamas is trying to force a wider conflict. Get the Egyptians, the Jordanians, and the Iranians in on it. Right now, a war is the last thing Syria needs. A war with Israel. Iran would also get its ass kicked if it doesn't watch it. Jordan doesn't want a conflict with Israel. Saudi Arabia, they're looking closer ties with Israel to counter Iran. No, Egypt doesn't want it. No one wants it. Only the people, mindless people. Hamas is already listed as a terrorist organization according to Canada. We don't exactly recognize the West Bank or the Gaza Strip. For good reason. Do I think CBC is biased? I think a lot of the reporting lately is left-leaning. But what can you do? Now this one, I've seen a lot of articles from these idiots. The On Canada Project, which is not very Canadian. In fact, they are very anti-white, anti-colonial, and everything in Canada is bad. Everything about Canadians' history is bad. Meanwhile, the people who created this online news site are all from India and are completely biased and not really good. They say corporate media and politicians in Canada showed us whose lives matter. The fact they didn't protect every single human life could scare the crap out of you. That's a pretty bold statement. Hamas, these people are saying The Israel's existence as a settler-colonial nation. Not once has the violence on civilian Israeli citizens been this bad. Devastating and inexplicably, okay, so they admit that. Except for this settler-colonial nation. This flies in the face of at least 3,000 years of history. There have always been Jewish people living in the Middle East. There have always been Jewish people living in Israel. So the On Canada project is obviously pro-Hamas. They call for a ceasefire between Hamas and the Israelis because we know civilians should not be harmed. Well, this isn't exactly a conventional war. Hamas is not mobilizing their army and going after the Israelis. Now that the Israeli military is on the border, Hamas is just firing rockets as fast as they can. They're going to run out sooner or later. It says here the Arabs have endured consistent oppression, dispossession, and both direct and indirect violence to the daily reality throughout these same time frame through systematic oppression and violence from Israeli government. Again, they don't take into account that there are Israeli Arabs, and there are 21% of the Israeli population is Arabic. And then their idea of history. Palestine is what the region now known as Israeli-Palestine has been called since at least 1517. It was governed by the Ottoman Empire until 1918. There are a couple of things wrong with that statement. First of all, the name Palestine was first used by the Romans after the Jewish rebellion of 144 AD, when the Romans expelled a part of the Jewish population. And in the countryside, the poor Jewish farmer still remained. They called it Palestine as a slap in the face to the Jews in reference to their ancient enemy, the Philistines. And the Arabs have nothing in common with the Philistines. And also to erase the name Judea from the Middle East. So Britain supported a Jewish homeland in Palestine influenced by geopolitical interests and Zionist lobbying to claim the region as their own. No, that is wrong. Even before the end of World War I, Jewish settlement was already a thing. Already there are Jews in the Holy Land. And there was a movement, there was an international movement by the Zionists to purchase land from Arabs, absentee landlords, and bring in Jewish settlers coming back to their ancient homeland. This would be like today in Canada if the Indigenous people of Canada were to buy back land that they once owned. In Canada, it'd be the same thing. If the Indigenous population of Canada got all their money together, got their wealthier ones, started buying land for their own people, bringing their own people back to the lands, that would be what it would be. Israel is an apartheid state. No, it is not, because there are many Israelis are different now. After almost 2,000 years of being deprived of their nation, many Jewish people have settled all across the world, and some of them intermarried with locals. There are black Jews, there are white Jews, there are brown Jews, there are mixed race Jews. They're not one color, which is what apartheid was in South Africa, based on color. It doesn't also say that 900,000 Jews were kicked out of Muslim countries between 1948 and 1980. The last being those in Iran, when the Shah of Iran was deposed. Also the fact, like I said again, there are 21% of the Israeli population is Arabic. That's not apartheid. The Israeli Arabs have full rights. Again, Israeli has offered the West Bank back to Jordan as a part of peace offering. Jordanians refused to take the West Bank back. So this thing goes on and on and on. So this website, I don't like giving publicity to garbage websites, but this one is definitely the most garbage Canadian. I wouldn't even call it a Canada project, because it's not. The first thing they said wrong. Palestine is a region known has been called since at least 1517. Well, you look at a map of 1517 Ottoman Empire, and it's independent Sanjak of Jerusalem, Sanjak of Nippur, Sanjak of Acre, Sanjak of Beirut, and the Vilayet of Syria. So I want to call out them for their extreme incompetence on history. It's pretty warped, and it's very misleading if someone who didn't know history came across this article and didn't do any due diligence on research. So these people are not exactly, and obviously their goal, they are socialist in nature. So this is how the Hamas-Israeli war is affecting Canada. It's dividing a large segment of our population. I, for one, would not allow any Arab refugees from Gaza into Canada because a lot of them will be Hamas supporters. Don't kid yourself. A lot of the people in the Gaza Strip support Hamas. A large percent of their population. Why would we want to bring that kind of crazy into our own country? I would also cut off all foreign aid to Gaza, as well as the West Bank, and I would also stop funding the United Nations Refugee Relief Agency that runs all the refugee camps in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan. Because after 75 years, I think these refugees should have moved on by now and settled elsewhere. In fact, they get funding about $1 billion a year mostly by foreign donors. And it's pretty sad that we haven't been able to resettle these people. Like I said, millions of people from World War II were resettled after the war. So anyway, that's my thoughts on the current developments in the Hamas-Israeli war. Any Canadians out there, let me know what you guys think in the comment section. I'm always open to hearing. And if anyone from the On Canada Project, I definitely want to hear from you clowns. Anyway, until next time, this has been the Great White North Report. I'm in love with the system. Never going home.